Chris Skillern es diseñador tipográfico y ciudadano de la nación Cherokee, originario de Tulsa, Oklahoma. Su fundición, Tulsi Type, se especializa en el diseño de tipografías nuevas e innovadoras, tanto para el alfabeto latino como para el silabario Cherokee, con el objetivo de ampliar el rango estilístico de este sistema de escritura. Desde que se graduó de Type West en 2021, Chris ha tenido la oportunidad de colaborar con fundiciones como A+ y XYZ Type en proyectos tipográficos personalizados. Actualmente trabaja con la Nación Cherokee y Tipotech en el desarrollo de nuevas tipografías para el silabario Cherokee. So, welcome, Chris.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm getting my screens situated here.
Yeah, don't worry.
All right, I think I'm ready. Let me share my screen.
Yeah, we're seeing it now.
All right, perfect. CO, Chris Dagwado. Hey, everyone, my name is Chris Skillern. I'm a type designer and a citizen of the Cherokee Nation from Tulsa, Oklahoma. My foundry is called, sorry, my slide behind. My foundry is called Tulsi Type. And I like to think of it as sort of a bilingual foundry because I specialize in both Latin and Cherokee type. I feel really honored to be here today and have the opportunity to speak to you all. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me and for putting on this great conference. And humbled to be among so many incredible presenters today. Everything's been great so far. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Cherokee Syllabary and sort of the history of the Cherokee Syllabary and why that history means that we need new type styles for the Cherokee Syllabary today and why we don't have any to begin with. So moving right ahead. So I want to ask you all to join me for a little thought experiment today. So imagine you walk into a used bookstore or you go to eBay and search for type specimens, as I do several times a day, and you come across this book and you immediately buy it, of course, because you've never seen anything like this before. And inside are all these beautifully printed examples of Cherokee wood type with borders and designs that evoke cultural motifs. You flip through the book and you get an idea for your next Cherokee typeface. And you also feel like you're getting a glimpse at a specific point on a timeline, probably the mid to late 19th century, a period in Cherokee type history you've never explored. It expands your understanding of the syllabary and its forms and how they can be rendered. Or at least that's how it works for Latin and other scripts with a long history. Cherokee type, unfortunately, does not work that way. You can't just hop on eBay and find a book dedicated to any number of styles or periods or mediums of Cherokee type. Now, there is definitely a rich history of Cherokee printing that spans 2 centuries, but it was used almost exclusively to inform, not to entertain or advertise or express. So the only Cherokee type that was available for Cherokee presses was newspaper type, 10-point, serifed, made to be legible. And there's a reason for that. So when you're constantly fighting for your survival as a people, typographic exploration and experimentation is probably a luxury, right? And native languages and cultural practices have always been under attack from the US. So the editors of newspapers like the Cherokee Phoenix and the Cherokee Advocate use their platforms to speak about issues of importance to Cherokee people, to warn of threats from the United States, and to argue for their right to exist, basically. Average Cherokee people, in the meantime, were using handwritten syllabary to communicate and to record. So again, when survival is the priority, I imagine typographic innovation takes a little bit of a backseat. So I obviously can't blame anyone for the lack of typographic diversity in Cherokee type, except for the policies of the US toward Native people. But with the benefit of hindsight, and with the challenges the Cherokee Nation and other Native nations in the US currently face, namely the loss of our languages, I can see how useful it would be to have a richer typographic history. Um, so I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit and say that my framing for this talk is a little misleading. This is really an argument for Cherokee display type or display type in general, something Cherokee people don't have, and something I feel like we desperately need. Um, but to even begin to understand why we might go about designing display type for the syllabary, or how we might go about it, sorry, we need to do some reverse engineering and use a little imagination. So to start, I'll give a quick history of what the Cherokee Syllabary is. Um, the Cherokee Syllabary is a real point of pride for Cherokee people and one of our most recognizable cultural signifiers. The syllabary is our writing system, and it was invented by a Cherokee man named Sequoyah, who was a blacksmith, a silversmith, an artist, and a statesman, who, by most accounts, was not all that familiar with written language before this invention. So as one story goes, one day Sequoyah overheard a group of young people talking in amazement about how white men could, quote, put talk on paper. And he basically said, "That's no big deal. I can do that." And he scratched on a stone with a pen and then read his sentence back to them. Then he became obsessed with the idea of devising a system of written language for his own people. He started work on it somewhere around 1809 and worked for a decade trying out different systems. He became a little bit of a hermit, and people didn't really understand what he was trying to do. And trying to find the best way to represent the Cherokee language, he first tried making a symbol for each sentence. And when that proved unsuccessful, he tried making a symbol for each word, but that didn't quite work either. This is the illustration I usually use to show why that would be so difficult. So each of these words you see on the screen is basically an entire sentence in Cherokee. Each syllable holds a different meaning, and just changing one syllable changes the meaning of the sentence. So anyway, after trying a lot of different things, he eventually broke down the sounds of the Cherokee language into 86 distinct syllables, and then he drew a symbol for each. His original designs actually looked like this, very intricate and sort of calligraphic. These were the designs that Cherokee people learned originally. Once he had developed these designs, he started sharing them with neighbors and family members who were all able to learn them very quickly. In 1821, Sequoyah introduced this invention, and within a year, 90% of Cherokee people could read and write the syllabary. And then in 1825, Cherokee Nation formally adopted it as the official writing system. The next year, in 1826, the Cherokee National Council voted to appropriate funds to build a printing office and purchase a printing press and cast a set of Cherokee type. This led to the Cherokee Phoenix, which was the first newspaper published by Native Americans in the US and the first published in a native language. And for a long time, it was printed in English and Cherokee side by side. This paper is actually still around today, and they still do all syllabary issues occasionally. So here's the important part for our purposes today. Making the move to metal type presented some challenges because it would have been nearly impossible to cut the intricate shapes that Sequoyah originally designed at such a small size. So by most accounts, Sequoyah simplified his designs himself, in some cases borrowing some forms from an English Bible he came across at his brother-in-law's house, or at least the ones that he thought looked close enough to his original designs. And for the rest of the glyphs, he created new forms. whatever the case, I know that the foundry that cast the type in Boston did substitute in some Latin characters here and there, and even some Cyrillic, Greek, and German characters. And they make different sounds than they make in those languages, but the the forms were borrowed for some characters. Um, Surprisingly, this did not cause readers of Cherokee to be unable to read it. And the metal type forms quickly became the standard form of Cherokee in both handwriting and print. That's important. Today, this is what people recognize as the syllabary. Here's a better look at the differences between the original designs and the updated designs. Roy Boney, who's a Cherokee artist and language technologist, put this together. The syllabary has since been integrated into pretty much every new technology you can imagine. There are Unicode code points for all 86 characters and for 86 lowercase characters. You can use the syllabary on your smartphone. Before digital publishing, there were typewriters made to support the syllabary. And throughout its 200-year history, though, the look of the syllabary has changed very little. Aside from some notable exceptions like Mark Jamra's wonderful Forius, the syllabary is still most often represented in a style similar to the original metal type. But I don't think that has to remain the case. So take a look at some of the signage around the capital of the Cherokee Nation here in Oklahoma. Now, obviously, this is beautiful to see, right? That almost everything is in Cherokee. But you'll notice, no matter what sort of sign it's on, it's in the same style, literally the same font in most of these cases. It's a font called Digaweli, which was inspired by the original metal type again. So I want you to imagine instead that the syllabary had been diversified over the course of its existence to the point where you could walk up to like this convenience store, go to grab a bag of ice, and instead of seeing something like this, you see something like this. Cherokee icy caps, a style that fits its role, right? Kind of a silly example, but you can see what I'm getting at. So that brings me back to my thought experiment. Under ideal circumstances, how might the syllabary have evolved over the last 2 centuries? How might Cherokee calligraphers, sign painters, and type designers have influenced the design of the syllabary? Would syllabary styles mirror those developed for the Latin alphabet over the same period, or would they have diverged? I have a few thoughts. So first, let's consider an alternate history. Suppose Sequoia's original designs remained the standard, as opposed to the updated metal type designs. You can pretty easily see how these would lend themselves to some beautiful calligraphy that would feel pretty distinct from Latin. And you can imagine sign painters, lettering artists, type designers, and others being very expressive with these forms. This path doesn't have any practical relevance for us today because these written forms are not the forms that people read today. So I personally find it more useful to consider how things might have developed between the redesign of the characters to metal type form and today. So what could Cherokee letter art practitioners have done with the metal type forms? Let's look at the influence of nature. The late Cherokee traditionalist Hastings Shade tells the story of how Sequoia found inspiration for his original glyphs. He says, he turned to nature to help him with this project. He looked at the birds, animals, and insects. As you look at his original alphabet, you'll see where these things had a great influence on his work. Sequoia saw where a worm had crawled and made a character from the track it left in the dust and gave it a sound. He looked at the birds and how they flew, sometimes in circles and loops. So he made a character and gave it a sound. This is how the first syllabary was made. I love this. and that DNA is still there in the updated forms. It's fun to think about how a Cherokee posture towards nature could influence the syllabary. One very recent example of this is a book that was released last year, I believe, called The Cherokee Syllabary, an illustrated key to the Cherokee language by Cherokee teacher and author Brad Wagnon and Cherokee artist Beth Anderson. Beth's beautiful illustrations here for the book were influenced by illuminated manuscripts. And I love how the forms themselves become part of the natural world. It speaks to the interconnectedness of all things in the Cherokee worldview. Imagine sign painters and lettering artists taking this idea and running with it. Perhaps over time, it could have helped to reshape the syllabary itself, maybe enlivening some of the more rigid characters, maybe pushing the forms in a direction that reached back to their more organic roots. Another avenue to explore is the potential influence of traditional patterns and symbols on the design of the syllabary. So there are lots of traditional patterns and motifs in Cherokee culture. The most recognizable ones come from basketry. There are also patterns from pottery and other crafts, and some of these are shared with other southeastern United States tribes. But there's a rich history of basket weaving in Cherokee culture with very distinct patterns. So how could these patterns have influenced Cherokee type? The thing that originally put this idea on my radar was this project by Cherokee designer and educator Monique Ortman. She named this project, this typeface, Kamama, which means butterfly. And she describes it like this. She says, Kamama aims to aid Cherokee language preservation through a typographic vehicle by fusing traditional Cherokee arts and crafts methods with my design techniques. This typeface is inspired by and designed for use in Cherokee river cane baskets and mat weaving, as well as digitally. Our traditional basket weaving techniques determined the final forms of this Cherokee typeface. So I think this is a really cool project, and I love how the constraints of basket weaving ultimately influence the forms themselves that Monique designed here. We could take this another direction and use the patterns as ornamentation, more or less. This is something that I threw together quickly, but I can imagine seeing something like this in my fictional wood type book. The thing that I keep coming back to the most, though, is handwriting. So for a script to branch off in all sorts of different stylistic directions, you first need a solid base model that provides all of the necessary DNA. And for Cherokee type, I don't think that's metal type, actually. I think it's handwriting. So Cherokee is weird in that, as I said earlier, handwriting followed the casting of the metal type and not the other way around. And it became its own thing with, as I've discovered, its own hallmarks that tell us a lot about how this script could have evolved stylistically under ideal circumstances, and how we can approach designing new styles for the syllabary today. So last year, I had the opportunity to spend a couple of days in the research library at Tulsa's Gilcrease Museum, the Helmerich Center for American Research, where I got to look at hundreds of pages of Cherokee handwriting, mostly from the 1800s. I got to look at letters and ledgers and journals and more. And I came away with a deeper understanding of the essence of the syllabary's forms. The express purpose for my research was to develop a cursive italic for one of the type families I've been working on for Tipotech. But it really ended up fundamentally changing the way that I think about the syllabary in general. One of the difficulties of designing in a different style for the syllabary is that the metal type models that fonts like these are based on don't really offer a clear skeleton to work with. A lot of these elements that look like serifs that you see here, these are actually not serifs, or some of them are not serifs, some of them are. But how do we know the difference? I think handwriting takes away the guesswork. So for the most part, you're not adding serifs when you write. So we can be pretty sure that what we're seeing here are the characters in their barest, most essential form. Handwriting is also much more fluid, so it can be a roadmap toward an italic or a script or a calligraphic design. I think everything we need to start filling in the gaps in Cherokee typography can be found in the relationship between Cherokee handwriting and Cherokee metal type. So let's look at how Cherokee calligraphy could have evolved from handwriting. I've seen many attempts at Cherokee calligraphy, but for the most part, they're just taking the metal type shapes and drawing them with a broad nib pen, basically. And the result doesn't really scream calligraphy to me necessarily. Instead, I want to propose something like this. So let's write the word Osta, which means good in Cherokee. I took a few forms from this manuscript that look flowy and calligraphic, sketched them with a couple different pens to determine the stroke modulation, and then refined the shapes and gave the word some consistency in my font editor, RoboFont. This reads more like calligraphy to me. And now we have a different sort of base model that can be adapted to different styles. For instance, we can take these shapes, change the tool or the way the weight is distributed, and turn it into sort of a brushy mid-century sort of script. I can imagine how something like this would have looked on, say, a roadside motel sign or something like that. This is the kind of thing I wish I could see driving around a Cherokee town just on the road. There are also regional differences in handwriting. So this is the handwriting of Cherokee translator David Crawler. It has this really unique sort of double barred approach and really distinct shapes that give it an interesting look. Here is a handwriting font that I made from David's handwriting. I was working with Jeff Edwards from the Cherokee Nation's language office to do this. The really cool thing about this is that this isn't just David's own idiosyncratic way of writing syllabary. He learned this from his grandmother, and this is how women in their community wrote. So I'd love to be able to look at the differences in how different communities have written the syllabary over time, because I think that would give us a lot of new possibilities and shapes for Cherokee type and just for other, other designs. Last, here are some sample characters from a typeface of mine called Chokecherry, where I've sort of borrowed from the handwriting forms a little bit to make this look a little bit more lively. Just as another example of how handwriting can inspire display type. And now I just want to show some of the work that I've done that has come out of all this research and practice. And first is Tepotech's Cherokee project. Tepotech brought me in to develop the Cherokee for two of their big multilingual font families, November and Lava. I've been working on this for a few years now, and I'm very close to finished and excited for this to be released. So November is a sans serif design, and most of the work on this has been trying to find the ideal forms for the characters in a sans serif style. I think I've ended up in a good place after all of my research. And what I'm really excited about here is just the huge number of weights and widths, which is something that we don't have for Cherokee at the moment. And I'm excited to get this out for people to start using. Here are some sample settings of November. With Lava, my goal is to make the most clean and readable serif design possible for Cherokee. The really cool thing about Lava is that it also has a true italic, which I was talking about earlier, which you see in the blue here. And a true italic currently does not exist for Cherokee either. So this has taken a lot of research and a lot of trial and error to get it to look right. And my research into handwriting that I talked about earlier was really hugely helpful for developing this italic. And here's a look at the differences between the upright and the italic. Just some slight changes, but the italic, you'll notice, has a little bit more handwriting, handwritten influence to it. And here's a look at several of the styles in November and Lava. Next is one of my designs. I call this typeface Afternoons, and it's sort of a bouncy and fun sans serif, which I built on the understanding of those underlying forms. Again, one of the things I wanted for Afternoons was a really heavy weight, and for that, I really needed to know which elements are essential, basically, as I was talking about earlier, what is a serif and what is not a serif? What can I remove without altering the legibility of the form? And here's another look at my typeface choke cherry that I mentioned earlier, which is taking the idea of those handwritten forms, making them upright. This one I'm pushing a little bit farther, taking a few more liberties. But once again, when you have a solid understanding of the root forms, then you can start branching off in all sorts of different directions. You can push the forms a little bit further as long as you know what it takes to keep them recognizable, if that makes sense. This is where it gets really exciting for me because I can see all the possibilities on the horizon. And finally, oh, sorry, wait, this is another look at choke cherry here. And finally, this is a really cool project I got to do recently. Cherokee Film has made a Cherokee language dub of Amazon Prime's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. And I got to make the Cherokee title font for it. It's a full font with uppercase and lowercase Cherokee, as well as Latin and punctuation. And this one was fun to do because it's basically like a built on like Roman capitals proportions, like Trajan or something like that. But it's Cherokee. And so this was a lot of fun to figure out how that would look in Cherokee. And again, my research into the basic forms was really helpful with this. So to wrap up, I'll just say that I know the syllabary itself is not the most important thing. The language is the most important thing, of course. If the language can't survive, then the script serves no purpose. But I also believe there's a symbiotic relationship there. All of the visual variety that exists for some scripts, that's a sign of a healthy and thriving language. Of course, Cherokee people need practical, usable fonts. But I think we also deserve display fonts. I really believe that's important. Display type gives language character, different moods and voices. It makes written language come alive in a way that it just can't when all you have is newspaper type. At a recent Cherokee printing event that I got to take part in, a tribal councilwoman asked one of the panels why we don't have something like a Cherokee bubble font. I showed her afterward that I'm working on one, and she was excited to see it. Another Cherokee artist I know who's working on a comic book recently asked me if I have any Cherokee comic book fonts, which is another thing on my to-do list. So there's a demand for display type. And I also think that sort of stylistic variety is important for the vitality of a language. If a language looks cool, people, and especially kids, are going to say, I want to learn that language. So look at what designers for Meow Wolf here in the States, for instance, do with completely made up alien languages. I think if these invented scripts can have this sort of variety, why can't Cherokee? So all of that brings me back to this. I can't tell you how much I would love to find something like this on eBay or on the shelf at a bookstore, and then to be able to pull it off of my own shelf and use it for reference. The way that all type designers reference old designs every day when we're designing Latin type. I'd love to be able to take a walk or a drive around the Cherokee Nation capital or another small town and spot some unique syllabary signage like this, because that's the sort of thing that kickstarts new designs. But the models for those things just don't exist. And that's the work I'm trying to do with my Foundry Tulsi type, expanding the stylistic range of the syllabary, imagining what might have been and turning that into what could be, trying to give the syllabary the kinds of moods and voices that we take for granted in Latin and other scripts. I want Cherokee type designers who come after me to have books that they can reference to inspire innovation. And, I'd love to see kids scrawling Cherokee lettering in the margins of their notebooks. I want the syllabary to be vibrant because I want the language to thrive. And selfishly because I want some Cherokee books on my shelf too. Wado, thank you so much.